Hello everybody and welcome back to LRN and our reaction to the findings that Red Bull have been found guilty of breaking the FIA financial cost cap regulations put in place for the 2021 season. So this is really huge news. The first team since the regulations were put in place to be found in minor or major breach of the regulations. We are of course assuming that the investigation has been thorough, checked, is accurate, and the amounts will be correct. It's confirmation that Christian Horner has been lying, as we sort of expected, about the fact that they have gone over the breach. I think the fact for him to claim they didn't know is either of course him lying, which we expected, or shows that they're completely incompetent in terms of their accounting, and of course couldn't admit to doing it on purpose. So yes, as expected, he is lying, and just more reason not really to believe what he says. Of course, you could apply that to any team boss. They are all in the job of defending their teams and ensuring that they're not known to have done anything intentionally, and I'm sure any other team boss would have done the same. But in this case, of course, it's Christian Horner, and it's completely expected that what he was saying in the media was completely different to what is, of course, being said behind the scenes, because 100% they knew that they had overspent on the cost cap, and I'm sure there were conversations going on in the background to ensure how they keep any potential punishments, what they needed to say, what they needed to do in the media to keep the punishments to a minimum. Of course, we do not know what those punishments should be. But at the moment, as it stands, the punishment has not been announced, and it could still include deductions of constructors and drivers' championship points. The general understanding is because it is a minor breach, it won't be enough to take Verstappen's championship away from him. So that's something that probably won't happen. And whether you're in a Verstappen camp or a Hamilton camp, you will be happy or unhappy to hear that news. Or maybe if you're just a general F1 fan and you didn't appreciate what happened in Abu Dhabi, you might still hold some bitterness and want to have seen that rectified via the FIA investigations. And again, if you are that person, then this isn't going to be something you want to hear. But the chances are we're not going to see the title moved from Verstappen to Hamilton. What we could see and what's still on the cards, though, is a deduction of drivers of constructors championship points, suspension from one or more stages of a competition, as in one that we haven't had yet. You would hope that would be next season, given that if you just suspended them from one or two races this season, it would achieve absolutely nothing. They're still going to win both championships easily. So please do not suspend them from one of the races left this season. It will not make anyone feel any better. And that's not just the fans, that's the other teams as well, because everyone knows that would be utterly pointless. Limitations to conduct aerodynamic or other testing. That's great, but they've already benefited from the extra testing they've already done. So they're already ahead. And depending on what limits you put on the future aerodynamic or other testing, it would have to be a really severe punishment for it to really bring other teams up to the level of Red Bull, to keep them from doing testing for a certain amount of time that really impacts Red Bull's ability to retain their position as it stands at the top of the F1 pyramid. So that particular punishment, if administered, would need to be harsh to make any real difference, because they are already benefiting from the work and the overspend that they've done previously. Now, again, we do not know yet how much overspend there is, and that is a real key point. So what I'll do quickly is just explain the difference between what they found with Red Bull and what they found with Aston Martin, who were also found guilty. So let me just explain the difference. So with Red Bull, they've been found to have spent less than 5% extra of the cost cap. So that comes to $7.25 million, up to, it could be anywhere from, a pound to $7.25 million over the cost cap. And they're in that range. Now, where they fall in that range, again, for me, will massively impact what the punishment should be. But I'll touch on that in a second. Aston Martin weren't found to be in minor breach. They were found to be in procedural breach. So that will likely be a fine of around $25,000, in line with what Williams had previously. What it essentially means is they didn't actually overspend on the cost cap. It's an administration error, a paperwork error, just something silly that's gone wrong, that's caused an issue in terms of their submission for the cost cap and what they spent, and that's going to administer them a fine. But they haven't actually benefited from a performance standpoint due to overspending on the cap, because they actually haven't. So that's something to be really clear on with Aston Martin. For them, it is a separate thing, a procedural administration problem for them, whereas Red Bull have been actually found guilty of overspending on the cap that all of the teams agreed to, and therefore are the only team that have overspent on the cost cap that all the teams agreed to. And this benefited them in the 2021 season. And I think it's really, really important that when they release how much they've overspent by, that people just understand this isn't, when they're calling it a minor breach, it isn't because it didn't give them a huge advantage. It's because they've characterized it as minor and major, less than 5% and more than 5%. That does not mean they didn't get a huge gain by spending up to $7.25 million. Now, if you can consider that, let's just say in an upper estimate, they could have brought a floor upgrade for around $400,000 to a race. And we know they had multiple upgrades post Silverstone in the 2021 season. Those upgrades, if you think about the volume of upgrades, but if you include, of course, the testing as well, let's just suggest that they could have had 3-4 upgrades. If they have spent maybe $1 million, then you could argue that equates to roughly 2 upgrades across the 2021 season. Now, they could be small upgrades. They could be worth only half a tenth a lap. We don't know, but that would be roughly what you'd think. If they have those spent up to the $7 million bracket, that is a significant investment that 100% would have contributed to at least the 8-point advantage Verstappen ended the season with. And I think at that stage, regardless of whether it falls within the minor breach or major, which it apparently hasn't in this case, I still think that $7 million would, in most people's eyes, equate to a huge overspend on the budget and a huge advantage gained. No matter how much you have overspent on something, it's still a massive, it's essentially, if you are there and if you're in a race and you decide to dope for an event, they don't test you for how much drugs you took to benefit your result, and then decide whether or not you should be included in the race, or maybe they give you a time penalty or whatever, and depending on how many drugs you took, they decide what you did or what the punishment should be. They find you guilty of taking the drugs in the first place, and they remove you from the competition. Now, with Red Bull, they have been found guilty essentially of F1 doping, because money is time when it comes to F1. You spend money, that equates to time gained on the track, and they have paid to win if the findings are, especially if the findings are as high as the 7 million threshold. Now, of course, this does change. It could be as low as $100,000. And if that's the case, it's a different conversation. And I'm completely fair about the fact that if they are found to have gone minimally over, and again, assuming the FI investigation is clear, accurate, thorough, and honest, if they are found to be minimally over, then yes, I can agree to the fact that the whatever they spent would not, if they hadn't spent that, it would not have allowed anyone else, Hamilton specifically, to beat Verstappen, and for Mercedes, obviously Mercedes beat Red Bull anyway, but it certainly wouldn't have been enough to make the difference for Hamilton to catch up. If they paid 7 million over though, or up there, that I'm going to say probably anything over $1 million is decent, but let's say $4 to $7 million over the cap, I think that amount is significant enough that a points deduction should still be on the cards. Now, I don't think it will be. I think that no matter what, if they are within the 7 million, that's it. The Drivers' Championship is done. That conversation will end, and that is the decision that will be made. It'll be up to you, the fans, on how you want to react to that. So I definitely want to know what you think when or now, in terms of what you think is going to happen next, but also when it actually goes live with the punishment and we find out what the overspend was. I really will want to know what you guys think about the punishment that's been given and whether it is appropriate for the crime when we get all of the information. But my view at the moment, when this news comes out, if it is a significant overspend, anything over sort of $3-4 million up to the $7.25 million bracket for minor overspending on the budget, serious repercussions need to be had, regardless of whether it's called a minor overspend. That's certainly my view. Minor does include driver and constructors championship, and it should. It should because there's such a wide spread of amount of money that could be spent within that bracket. So really important that we understand what the overspend is before fully reacting and deciding whether or not the FIA have acted responsibly in terms of the punishment provided. Because as I say, it could be a really minimal amount they've gone over, in which case it is what it is, the punishment will be what it is, and we can review it at the time. But if it is the case, because of course we did have a lot of rumours around the paddock that they had gone majorly over, and they could go over the 5%. So it could be they're really close to it, and there was a bit of misinformation because of how close they were. If that turns out to be the case, the punishment still needs to fit the crime. They have paid to win, essentially, if they are anywhere near that $7 million limit, and I want to see the correct punishments given. Definitely let me know what you think in the comments below. But as I say, the Aston Martin one's completely separate. It's procedural, not an overspend, but Red Bull have been found guilty of overspending on the cost cap limit. So that is the news that we have today. I haven't seen yet when we're going to get final announcement of, or final report that we can read as the public, to see what the overspend was, what the discussions were, what the final decision is in terms of the punishment. As soon as we get that information, I'll be putting up another video to go through everything that's happened. So please make sure you're subscribed to the channel, you've got your notifications on, so you find out when that video goes up, and we can go through in detail what that report says, why they've come to the decision that they have, and whether or not the punishment they decide fits the crime of overspending on the cost cap. And it will massively depend, in my eyes, how much they've gone over from that minimum amount to that $7.25 million. Where will they sit in that bracket, and what punishment will be assigned to it? Because F1 have been clear they will be severe with these punishments, and now is the time to show it. Because if they don't, every other team will be overspending on this cost cap from now on. If they know they've got an extra $7.25 million to spend, and the repercussions for that are nothing, every team it will be spending $7 million over the cost cap, and you may as well just increase it. So they need to be firm, they need to be strong, otherwise the system becomes redundant. This isn't about punishing Red Bull, it's about setting a precedent that it won't be accepted, and making sure all teams are following the rules moving forward, because they know what the punishments will be. That simple. Not witch hunting Red Bull or Max Verstappen. I don't want them individually to be, to be treated harshly, but it's their fault they've gone over. It's their fault they spent too much. They've done it knowingly, and the punishment needs to fit the crime. So when we find out just exactly what the crime was in terms of the amount spent, we'll find out the punishment, and we'll go from there. But anyway, guys, I want to thank you so much for watching. Please make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit a like on the video, and keep an eye out for the next one that goes up, when we'll be discussing what the punishment is and whether or not it's just for the crime when we find out more information. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day. Goodbye.